In order to trust again, you have to work through the grieving process. You have to go through all of those different emotions with yourself, therapist, or even with the person involved in this situation for you. And it's about understanding where it went wrong, what you may have contributed, if anything, to the situation, because there's two people in a relationship.
This is episode number 599 with Lisa Brateman. We're going to be talking about how to move on after infidelity. If you have ever had somebody cheat on you or you've cheated on a partner and you want to know how to move on, how to trust again, this episode is for you. Hi, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner. I'm a dating and relationship coach, and I want to welcome you back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support your journey to lasting love, I've written 2 books. The first is Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this book is for anyone who wants to feel more confident, more confidence, more competence in life, in all areas of life, not just in dating and relationships. And my second book is called Choice Points in Dating. And this book I wrote for anybody who wants to make healthier choices in your dating journey. Both books are on Amazon for Kindle or paperback, and Choice Points is now available for Audible as well. This week's tip on becoming a woman of value is step number 6, learn to receive graciously. I would say most people are better at giving than receiving. So my challenge to you this week is to receive, just receive. When somebody compliments you, receive. If somebody wants to pay for a meal, say thank you. If somebody wants to give you something, appreciate them and receive it. Before I bring on my guest today, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date, and we are a really unique group on Facebook. Most groups for single women are really just a place to come and complain, and very few of them are actually moderated. My group is moderated by 7 fabulous monitors and myself, and we have engaging posts. We are a group that has guidelines, which very few groups do. So if you want to come to a place where you're going to grow and learn and you're a woman over 40, join us at Your Last First Date. My guest today is Lisa Brateman. She is a psychotherapist, a relationship specialist, a public speaker, media commentator with more than 2 decades of experience. She's also the author of The Courage to Walk Away, Move On After Infidelity by Mourning What You Lost, Identifying Your Relationship Needs, and Empowering Yourself for the Future, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And she offers individuals and couples and group therapy in New York City. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thank you, Sandy. So great to be here today.
Tell me first why you wrote this book. What was the motivation?
The biggest part of the motivation is, after working with couples for years, infidelity comes up a lot. And it's not sexual infidelity, which is one specific area. It's about financial infidelity and emotional infidelity. And between the 3 different types that I highlight, not to say there aren't others, but those are the major 3, they come up a lot in sessions of years, whether the couples are together, where they're trying to stay together, where they've moved on. It is a certain sense of betrayal that sometimes people can't quite put their finger on why they feel what they feel so long afterwards. So it's kind of putting language to their feelings. The sexual infidelity, we all hear about and know about, and that's much more obvious, but the other 2 are just as impactful in just different ways.
Yeah, I actually had somebody talking about financial infidelity on the podcast before, but we'll get into that a little more later. But I'm glad that you brought up that there are several types of infidelity. I think people just think about having an affair, a sexual affair, and betraying the partner. But trust is really a difficult thing in all relationships. And I think when your trust has been betrayed in any way, it's really hard to trust again. So what do people do? How do they trust again after somebody cheats or there is some kind of infidelity?
Well, trust is earned over time. And if you trust the person and then you were betrayed by them, it's not something that you're going to turn around and say, okay, I'm open now, and that happened before, and that was him or her, and maybe that is true, but it's something that, in order to trust again, you have to work through the grieving process. You have to go through all of those different emotions with yourself, therapist, or even with the person involved in this situation for you. And it's about understanding where it went wrong, what you may have contributed, if anything, to the situation, because there's two people in a relationship. So what I described is probably something that happens over a long period of time. You can't be betrayed and then just say, okay, that happened there, move on. I mean, you can try to, but it doesn't work that way. Over time, do you see a difference in the person? Let's say you decided to stay with the person because you want to, for a multitude of reasons, you have children, you really want this relationship to work. The other person has to prove to you over time that they are trustworthy, that your goals now align. If your goals don't align, that's the tricky part. If you decided to leave, you also have to know that is that specific relationship, and to be open to someone new, you're going to go in with questions. You're going to be looking at things differently than you did. I mean, you can't have that experience and just jump right back in. So you have to give yourself time. And I think when I keep on saying time is our emotions, our intellect has to catch up with our emotions.
Yeah, and people say, "Oh, time heals." Time, it's not only time.
No.
It's much more complex than that.
What do you
But
do with the time is
yes,
really, yeah.
right. Are you seeing a therapist? Are you working on yourself? Are you asking the right questions? Are you mourning, grieving,
Yeah.
figuring it out? And I like that you also point people back to what was your part. People have a hard time hearing that. They think, well, that happened to me. I had nothing to do with it. And every relationship, like you said, there's two people in that relationship, and there are two people who are responsible for the relationship. And I remember once I was part of a Facebook group that was for singles, and somebody was talking about betrayal and affairs or abuse, even. And I said, that each person is responsible. And that person got so mad at me. I ended up leaving the group because it was just a bunch of people hating on each other. But it took me a long time to realize my part in my failed marriage as well, because I tried really hard. I was always trying to resolve conflict, to speak up, to have good communication, to work things out. But I also made a choice to stay. I also made a choice to try and change somebody that was not changeable, right? So there's lots of things involved in these relationships. And the other thing I want to highlight that you said is that trust is earned over time. I think that people get into relationships and think, oh, well, I'm crazy about this person, but they haven't earned your trust. You haven't earned their trust. They haven't earned your stories, your vulnerabilities, and you need to take your time to build trust, which is why it's hard to build it back up again if you've had betrayal.
Yeah, and you can't sit alone in your house mulling over it and get over it either. You have to re-enter the world with the knowledge that you're not going to immediately. And that's okay too. I mean, nobody has to be in perfect shape to go out in the dating world. You have to be in perfect shape probably to try out for the Olympics, but this is not the Olympics.
Yeah, right. So it might be hard to trust somebody else when you're out there, but we also have to learn how to trust ourselves and trust our judgment. And I see this a lot in coaching. What are some tips for people who want to begin to trust their own judgment?
I think being able to trust your own judgment is really about knowing yourself. I think a lot of our judgments or our choices sometimes are the influence of other people, important people in our life. And in some ways, when we are vulnerable to that, also vulnerable to not knowing what is best for us. You hear in coaching, I'm sure you hear this all the time. What should I do? And people ask me that as well in therapy, whether it's couples or individuals. And I do always let people know that they are the best person to ask that question to, because nobody, even their therapist, nobody knows them deep down as well as they do. And if you rely on others to tell you what you do, number one, you don't own it. Well, so-and-so said that, that's a bad idea. That didn't work out. It's easy to blame others. So knowing yourself better, I think, is the first thing to be able to choose somebody who's a good fit, not who you think you should be. So I've always believed, even in a therapy session, I don't tell people what they want to hear. I try to help people tell them what they need to hear. And that, I think, is part of the first process of it. Do you know yourself? Do you really know what you are? Or are you still carrying over your family's thoughts of who you should be with or who you are? Because you've changed a lot since you were in your childhood home and your influence of your parents, but sometimes that influence still exists even now.
And it's often very unconscious. We don't even realize the influence that our family has had or that society has had. We have biases, we have judgments, we don't even know where they come from. So being able to take those apart and really ask yourself, is this me or is this somebody else's opinion, is such an important part of personal growth and making better decisions for yourself. So I love that you said this. I think, part of what I do in coaching also is to have people look at a values chart and look at what are their core values, what are their core needs, what are they feeling? I mean, so many of us don't even know what's going on in our bodies half the time. Like we're reacting to others instead of paying attention to ourselves.
Yeah, or what our friends say, or a lot of people, when I was growing up, parents' advice was find somebody who will take care of you.
Oh yeah.
That was pretty classic. Or there used to be this one phrase that I used to hear a lot: become a teacher, because you have to get a job, so to speak, if you're not getting married right away. Become a teacher, then you have summers off to be with the kids. Or like those were the type of things that parents, kind of push their kids or recommended for their kids, as opposed to become independent yourself and meet somebody where you are.
There was a lot of bad advice back in the day. There still is, actually. It's interesting. And I was just talking to a client about this morning because she just finished her coaching engagement, her coaching package with me. So we've been together for 6 months, and a big part of her personal growth was learning who she was and what she needed, as opposed to what her mother told her she needed. And, we have agency. We have the ability to really question, what is this advice we've been getting from people? And it's hard to make good decisions. Good decisions are based on more than just information. They're based on really who we are at our core and honoring that part of us. And so a lot of people go out and date again. They still have uncertainty. So not everybody is walking around with such clear confidence in their choices. Do you have any advice for people who feel really uncertain and feel, I still haven't had all my questions answered about why this person cheated? What do we do with that information?
And there has to be a certain acceptance of, I know enough to make a decision what's best for me. Because the reasons that you're told, whether it's emotional, financial, or sexual, that's what they know about. They may not even know all the reasons what brought them to betray. So you have to there's a point where you have to accept this and then turn the corner, learn who you are, And in part of even learning who you are, even if you don't go a deep dive into that beforehand, listen to your instincts, because there's so many situations where that I wasn't sure about how I felt about that conversation, or that was odd, or why did he ask me for a picture so early? Or if you have a feeling and an intuition that something doesn't feel right, like listen to yourself. I think you might have this conversation with a friend and say, he did this, he said this is how soon he texted afterwards, and this is what he said, and all the details that you do with your friends, but you don't necessarily bring up, but when this happened, I felt uncomfortable. So I think the importance is to listen to yourself. When your body says something, I think it's important. It may not rush to, oh, this means this, but put yourself on notice. Oh, I want to explore this more. Or I want to ask a follow-up question. Because I think sometimes when people want something so much, and people want a healthy relationship, they, even the second time around or the third time around, they dismiss things that should be noted, should be looked at. It's also important, I think, to go into it, and nobody's going to, like I said, is okay, I am ready to go. I think a lot of people, men and women both, equally have a checklist that they're married to. And when you have a checklist that you're married to, what you end up with is your checklist, and not necessarily a person. One particular situation is one gentleman wanted a partner who just as enthusiastic about football as, like, that was like in his top five. And I remember saying, do you realize you're ruling out like 60% of the population, right from your checklist? And then there were others that were more understandable. So like that happens too.
Yeah. I mean, I when I hear people's checklists, I always go underneath, like, what's important about that? What's important
Yeah,
about that football thing? Like,
yeah.
people say, and most people's checklists are really unrealistic and have nothing to do with character. They're
Mhm.
more
Or
about
values.
societal. Right, right.
Yeah,
Values.
yeah.
It's, height, weight,
Hmm.
hair, teeth. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have all those things, but they don't determine whether you're going to have a good relationship. And again,
Yeah.
this is societal pressure.
Hmm.
Will I feel good bringing this person to meet my family because of how they look and how they dress rather than how they make me feel? And, who am I in their presence? And so we're taught all the wrong things. And that's why I do what I do. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with how you help people make better choices and really understand themselves and the people that they end up with.
Yeah. Very often, speaking to that point, very often I'll be sitting with a client and they'll say, I would like this, or I want this. And I certainly know the client well enough at this particular one at this stage to know, is that what she wants, or is that what she was taught to want? And I'll ask, I said, is that truly a need for you? If that is a need for you, that's important, and let's move with that. But it's about getting other people's voices out of your head. Because when
Yeah.
you go on that date, metaphorically, there are about six people with you.
It's crowded.
Yeah, and you only have a table for two. Yeah.
Right.
You,
Yeah.
I read something you said recently, which I loved. I absolutely loved. Something about, and I will get the quote wrong. The gist of it will be it. You keep on dating the same person over and over again with a different face.
Mhm.
And if we don't examine ourselves, if we don't understand ourselves, and we will continue to do that. If we don't look inward, we will make the same outward mistakes, or even if it's not a mistake, it's a good for now solution. This is where people say, well, that's who I'm attracted to. But the healthier you become, and the more you know yourself, the healthier your choices will be.
Your attractions change over time with
Yes.
your health. Yes. I think
Yes.
people don't realize that. They think they're hardwired for attraction. And yeah, we are in many ways. And we,
Hmm.
our childhood, our blueprints, all the things that we grew up with, our attachment
Hmm.
style. But we can rewire our brains to be healthier. And
Mhm.
one of the
Mhm.
first things that I learned, you talked about how we kind of can not recognize the signs. A lot of times I think that we normalize abnormal behavior when we
Mhm.
come from homes that are not as healthy. And people who have a healthier outlook can recognize right away, oh my God, that's a red flag. Like when my client told me that this person cheated over and over and took no responsibility, and she called it a yellow flag. And I said, no, that's a red flag.
That's a double red
Even
flag.
right, it's a double red flag. It's waving and smacking you in the head. And there were many others. There were financial issues. There was depression that wasn't treated. I mean, there were so many things that were not okay. And, a lot of people also are just, I want to give them another chance and I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so when you don't have that clarity, you keep giving people chances. And I did that.
Mhm.
I did that most of my life until I started to grow and become healthier. So we can change and grow and make better choices.
When you're younger, who is the ideal boyfriend? The captain of the football team. He's tall, good looking, strong, can throw a football. And who, on the other end, it's the cheerleader, or the bad boy, or the whoever it is. And when we get older, I had a client recently, and this was a really important moment because she had said to me, when I was younger, I looks were 90% the most important thing for me. She said, and now she's in her 40s and she's dating again, and that was what she put her attraction first and foremost. Now she says she's attracted to men who are kind
Hmm.
to her, which is
Kind.
someone you can have a relationship with, as opposed to someone who's shiny and flashy and looks good on paper.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a great story because you really are attracted to kindness. You really become more enamored with every kind act that a person does. And as I'm editing my newest book, I'm just today I
What's
was
the name of
editing.
your, what is the name of it?
Well, it's changed names a couple times.
Okay.
The working title right now is Love at Last, I think it's called.
Oh,
And it was called Hope and Confidence to Love Again, which is my tagline. So I'm not sure what title it's going to be, but
okay.
it is stories of people who found love later in life, as I was telling you before we started taping. And this one story that I just finished editing is a woman was saying how she knew this guy was right for her, and she didn't get married for the first time until she was 50. He called her out on her BS, and
Mm,
she was a conflict avoidant woman who all of her relationships she had avoided conflict, and so he had done something to upset her. It was minor, and she iced him out. She wouldn't answer his calls. She answered his text very curtly, and the next day they were supposed to get together to do something, and he came over and he said, what's going on? I'm really upset with the way that you treated me yesterday. And she said, well, I was upset with you. And he said, listen, if we're going to be in a relationship, we're going to have to talk things out. You cannot treat me this way. And she was like, oh my God, this guy's a keeper. Like it really showed her that he was taking a stand for the relationship and he wanted to have deep connection and have these conversations that were difficult, which so many people avoid. And so that's not about his looks. And she said, even like, he's not the kind of guy who would stop somebody on the street because he's so good looking, but he is the person that makes everyone who meets him feel better.
what he pointed out was her behavior towards him was punitive. You're
Yeah.
punishing somebody by responding that way. You're trying to teach them a lesson, whether it's from fear or whatever the reason is. The bottom line is you're icing someone out. And
Yeah.
he had the confidence and cared enough to change the course of that because that could have petered out.
Yes. Which the other ones all had. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I think it's an important thing for us to think about it, that relationships are not based on the most attractive person in the room and the most witty. It really has so much to do with character and how we treat each other, which when we have infidelity, that is not present. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer. Tell us what emotional infidelity is and why it's so hurtful.
As opposed to sexual infidelity, there's usually, at least in the beginning part, it's not a sexual relationship. Often it could be a coworker that you see every day. In circumstances, it could be a friend. Often it's a coworker. You know that there was a phrase that was going around a couple of years ago, my office husband, my office wife. And which is fine to have a close, good relationship with people you work with, and that has a lot of benefits. But when that's the person you go to with the stuff you need to talk about, and you're no longer going to your partner, you're not telling your partner how you're concerned or distressed. You're telling your friend at work. They know over time, they know more about your emotional life than your partner does. So it's infidelity in the sense of when you heard some bad news, you called your person at work, or you talk about your marriage, and if it's difficult, in great detail. I think there's a big line between having a support system, which we all should have. All your personal stuff is going outside the house, and it is very painful because it's a different kind of pain. Why don't they talk to me anymore? Why are they always out? Why don't they trust me with information? And often that relationship, sometimes their partner knows about that friendship, but sometimes they don't know to what degree it is. And when it gets found out, it's really hurtful because it feels like it was hidden, it was a secret, or it was minimized. And that is painful, knowing that there's somebody out there who knows on the emotional front more than you've known in a year or 6 months or even 3 months about what's going on in your life.
And so what might make somebody turn to a friend or a coworker over their partner?
Most of the time, they're not feeling like they're being heard at home, or they're talking and their partner's listening, but they're also checking their phone, and they're also half listening or not really. You don't feel the support. People move outside of the relationships because their needs aren't being met for the most part. And in this sense, the emotional connection, whether it's over time or situation, has changed. And rather than refocus and re-enter that, if things feel distant, they look elsewhere. And if you had it at home in the way you need, there would be less of this going on. When your needs aren't met, people, it's a drive. They find where they can get them at.
Yep. And it happens a lot. It happened to me, actually.
It did. Okay.
It did. At the end of my marriage, because I had been trying to get my needs met for so long, and I met somebody when I was away working at a sleepaway camp. So my husband wasn't around, my kids were there, and here was a man who paid attention to me, who saw me and heard me for the first time in years. And I didn't even know that it was happening because I was so shut down. But it was a catalyst for me to leave my marriage, because I realized how close I could have gotten to having an affair, to having a full-blown affair. And that was absolutely not something I ever wanted to do. Sure. But I realized how desperate I was to feel a connection with somebody. And it was so missing for so many years. And so, it was a wake-up call for me, but it was something that I wouldn't do today because I have different skills, and I would have probably left sooner. But it's not so easy to walk away from a marriage and children and history, and
it's the hardest thing to do.
Yes,
it's the hardest thing to do. Everything you've built in this relationship, whether it's a home and family, even having pets, to change that changes everything.
Mhm.
And that's why a lot of people stay, because it feels too hard to leave. And many, many years ago, as you could probably appreciate, if a woman didn't have her own career or make her own money, it was even more difficult. They felt
Yep.
so dependent and they couldn't leave.
Yep.
And it's different now, and that because you're staying because you want to, not because you have.
Yeah. And at the end, for me, it was too big of a cost to stay. And
Yes,
I did have choices, and I was able to start over. And it was the best thing for all of us in the end. But
but it's hard.
yeah, it is hard. It is hard. So for anybody listening who's struggling, because I know a lot of people who keep staying, it is really hard. And take a good look at what the cost is for staying and what the cost would be for leaving. I think, get support, because it's hard to do this on our own. Well, let's touch on financial infidelity and then we'll come to an end. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how people can identify it.
Financial infidelity is interesting and trickier in some ways, because let's say two people get together and people are marrying later these days, and so therefore they have their own jobs, their own money, their own investments, this and that. And then they come together and they want to put their money together starting day one that they're together, but they also have their own money. What financial infidelity is when there's secrets around finances. If you keep separate credit cards, which is fine to keep separate credit cards, but if you're saving up to buy a house and you plan on trying to save this amount, and all of a sudden one of the partners can't, you discover they have a gambling house. You discover the week you stay home from work that they order Amazon products 3 times a week, which you didn't know about. All of a sudden you see credit card bills for really high end things that was never discussed. So it's about, it could be an addiction. It could be just being secret. Well, why should I make my own money? I don't have to tell you what I spend, but you have to understand, even if you have your own separate money, this is still a partnership and big things should be discussed together. So sometimes one person, what happens most often is one person handles the finance. So I always suggest with couples who are getting married, it's okay if she does all the financial stuff. That's her field. She likes it. And you do this. That's fine. But each person should be aware of what and where things are or how it works. You don't both have to pay bills, but you both have to be aware. And when sometimes there's sexual infidelity, and all of a sudden you find a credit card with hotel stays that you didn't know, or that you thought you had this much money in the bank, and now there's $500. So you have a sexual affair, and now you have a financial situation, and you, in many cases, the marriage is up for question, and you have no money. So that's kind of the double whammy there that happens, because you're lying about this and throw this into it. I thought we had this. So the trust and the security can take years and years and years to recoup and to feel secure again on that front. The same way infidelity would make somebody feel scared. This is just another way. And sometimes it's a double one.
A lot of times in a divorce, finances are uncovered for the first time, which is a shame. And so I've had like forensic, financial
Accounting.
forensic people come in to the podcast and talk about this.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about what went on in my marriage at all. Like, I just left it up to my husband. I paid bills, but he managed the money, and I had no idea. I just had this abstract idea. And so, I mean, he wasn't hiding.
About how it should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then you see people who do spend money without discussing, and, come home with the new car or the new TV and never talk about the fact that they want to buy it and it's coming out of a joint account. So it is a betrayal. You need to develop these requirements or agreements rather in your relationship about how you're going to discuss finances, spend money, combine money, keep money separate, so that you can avoid all of this mess. But I can imagine that when there's a big surprise, it becomes a betrayal. And how do you recoup? And sometimes you can't.
Sometimes you can't. So a lot of people don't want to know or have no interest in finance. And they don't have to have an interest in finance in a general sense, but it's important to have interest in your own finance, or at least check in on it. And with some couples, it depends on their financial situation. There could be a threshold of, okay, if I spend more than $600 on something or want to, let's just, I'm going to run it by you and you run it by me. But anything less than that, I'm not gonna, mention, oh, I just bought a new whatever, and that doesn't have to be a discussion, especially if it's a need. So they come up with the couple actually comes up with a number about what they're comfortable with, and that kind of it helps for have future conversations they might not have had otherwise.
Yeah, which I think is so important. And you don't want to be micromanaging small purchases, obviously. So you do have to come up with a number that makes sense.
Right, for them.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people in a divorce situation where they start looking at all the numbers and they're like, wait, you bought opera tickets? Who'd you go with? Oh, you had an affair. Oh, and there's money in the Cayman Islands? Oh, interesting. It's like, all this stuff that happened and we choose to see or not see, and we never have discussions, and it's such an important thing. So my final question that I ask everyone is, what are your final words, Lisa, for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
Leave your checklist home. Go in as much as possible, open-minded, and leave your expectations at home, because within 10 minutes, if you have certain expectations, they may be dashed within the first 10 minutes. And the charming, interesting conversation you had 30 minutes later can't exist because you've already decided, how they ordered their drink. Try to come in with an open mind. Listen to what you see in front of you. Keep the other voices at home. And the most important thing is, you're going out, say to yourself, whether this is my last date or not, I want to have a really good time. And go in with that premise rather than, okay, you have to impress me so I could be interested, which is what often happens. Like, oh, they didn't bring up anything interesting. They talked about things that didn't interest me. Well, start talking about what interests you and see what they do with it. Just don't jump to decision. You want to have this your last date, give it the best shot you can.
Good advice.
Thank you.
People really go in with a closed mind, with a set idea, with such high expectations of who a person is, which is also why I tell people not to spend too much time getting to know somebody before you meet, because you already form an idea from that in your mind, and then you actually meet them and you go, oh my God, they're nothing like I expected. And you don't even see them anymore, So, and the whole thing with leaving the other voices out of the picture, it's a hard thing to do, but to keep coming back to center and how do I feel? And I have my clients fill out a debriefing form each time they go on a date. So they have to ask themselves questions about themselves. How did I feel on the date? How did my body feel? Was I bored? Was I interested? Did I feel attractive in their presence? Some of these questions from Logan Urie's book, How to Not Die Alone. And just when you debrief dates, you're coming back with real information instead of, it was a good time, it was a bad time. You need more than that. Right. So thank you, Lisa. This is a great conversation about infidelity and more. It's really about how to have better relationships in the end, and how to make sure that you are paying attention all along, so that if something happens, you can address it head on. And I think that it's really important. So go out and get the book. And if you're watching on video, this is the book, The Courage to Walk Away. And Lisa, if you can share maybe your website, I'll have all the other links to your social media.
Yes.
On the show notes.
My website is lisabrateman.com. Okay. My first name and my last name.com. And awesome. It's This book came out on Tuesday. So it's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. If you just put my name in or the code Walk Away, Move On After Infidelity, you will find it there.
All right. And there'll be a link to the book in the show notes as well.
Great.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on the
Thank
show
you.
and giving us this wonderful information. I think it's just so important. And I loved our conversation.
Same here. Thank you so much.
And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please give us a high rating on Apple Podcasts. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.